Hey everyone, welcome back aboard the Earthmote. I'm Randall, and today I have another product review for you. Today we are going to be looking at Old School Essentials Adventure Anthology 2 by Necrotic Gnome. This was a part of a Kickstarter that they did a couple years back where they were reprinting their box sets, and as a part of the stretch goals, they had these different adventures that were tacked on when certain funding goals were met. They've made the anthology available for sale. You can get the print product on Exalted Funeral for $20, or you can get a PDF copy of it on DriveThruRPG for $10. There's 4 adventures inside, so you're looking at $2.50 per adventure on PDF or $5 for the print copy, so not too bad. I don't have a physical copy of it because as a backer of the Kickstarter, I only got the PDF, but I do have a other module that they have done before, and their books are, all their adventure modules are all the same. They do these A5 style print books. The quality of the book is quite good. They're stitch sewn binded, and yeah, they're worth it if you like the physical copy. They're a high quality product. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into Adventure Anthology number 2. So first off, we have the maps up front of the 4 different adventure sites. Here we have the credits, the different authors doing the adventures. We have Chance Dudnak, Diago Nogueira, Nate Treem, and Brian Yaksha. Table of contents, so we can see that each adventure is roughly 15 pages in size. The book in total, I think, is like 63 or 64 pages long. Then we have an introduction, just giving a quick overview of the 4 different adventures that we have. And then we go right into the first one, which is Barrow of the Bone Blaggards. So level 1 through 3 dungeon adventure by Chance Dudnak. Chance wrote the popular adventure Black Worm of Brandonsford, and this adventure looks like another great one written by him. So to give a quick summary of the adventure, we have a group of brigands that are actually skeletons that are robbing nearby caravans and making off with their goods and prisoners, and the players are asked to investigate. There seems to be a barrow nearby where the robberies are taking place, and there is some strange music coming from within. What has actually happened is a aspiring necromancer went into the barrow and cast some sort of ritual that awoke these different zombies and skeletons, and he lost control of them. He had no control over them, and they were threatening to kill him, but he acted that if he continued the ritual, he could turn them back into human or flesh. So they are allowing him to sort of continue the ritual while they are carousing and robbing the countryside. So a lot of flavor there. It's a nice twist on sort of a necromancer with a undead horde. The horde is actually kind of turned on the necromancer, and now he's trying to figure out how he's going to get out of this predicament that he created for himself. So here we have the map over on this page. I really like this map. We have a couple different egresses that the players can come in from, the sort of central part of the barrow, or this kind of tunnel on the left-hand side of it. Lots of nice looping, so different paths that the players can take that meet back up to other chambers. So lots of different kind of looping and interactivity there. Necrotic Gnome does a great job with their maps, making them nice and clean, well keyed, so you can easily understand which room is which and what you're looking at. Really nice informational map here. The one thing that I wish that they did in their anthology products, both Anthology 1 and Anthology 2, that they did in their standard products is include kind of smaller snippets of the maps as you are reading through, so you don't have to flip back and reference the large map every time. It's sort of closer at hand, so you can kind of see what rooms they're talking about. I found myself as I was reading these flipping back often to be like, oh, okay, it's this room, and gain a better picture in my head. So I guess it's understandable with these being slightly shorter adventures. So as I mentioned, we have a few denizens going on. We have Quintus, who's the necromancer, who's now found himself in trouble. The undead that are sort of become these brigands and are robbing the countryside. Then you have a pixie Elfwine that has who took up residence within the barrow, and then when the necromancer came in and awoke the skeletons, has kind of infuriated her, and she's actually been trapped And if the players find her, they can interact with her, and she might be willing to help them out because she wants the undead gone and out of the Barrow. And then lastly, there's an undead treant that was also awoken by Quintus's ritual, but he sees undeath as sort of this unnatural cause, and he would like to return to death, and so it might be an ally or sort of a neutral party that the players can work with to get information about the Barrow. Necrotic Gnome does a really great job on keying their rooms. We can see that each room here is delineated clearly, and then they do a really nice job with the descriptions. They don't have walls of text. It's generally just a couple sentences with some really sort of nice flavorful elements that give a picture of what's in the room. And then they also use bolding and bullet points to break out the different ideas or key elements in the room that the dungeon master needs to know to be able to run that room effectively. Chance does a really great job of adding sort of fun interactive elements within the Barrow. So for example, we have the Hall of the Floating Jar, which is sort of this clay jar that's suspended in the air by a near invisible spider thread silk. So if the players touch it, it'll come crashing to the ground and maybe cause sort of this hazard effect where they might be coughing up the dust. And as a result, of course, the noise will draw a wandering monster to the area. There's other fun things like the cave-in, where there's sort of these skeletons that are trapped by this cave-in, and they can see their hands flailing about, and one of them is holding a magic sword in it. So there's sort of this risk-reward opportunity where if the players want to get their hands on this magic sword, they can do so, but they're going to risk sort of these flailing attacks from the skeleton arms in order to get it. In room 6, the players can find the trapped fairy, Alfwine. So the skeletons have buried her under this small cairn, and if the players free her, she'll be, furious with the undead and be willing to help the players as long as they don't steal her gold from her. So a lot of sort of fun interactive elements, sort of different tricks and hazards going on, along with allies or creatures that the players can talk to get more of a sense of what's going on in the Barrow. There's a fun room with tapestries. So there's 3 different tapestries, and one looks like it's woven in cloth of gold, which is actually a yellow mold hazard. So if the players touch that, they will trigger the mold spores into the air. But behind it is some treasure. So is it worth that risk? That's up to your players. And then behind the other 2 is actually a locked door and a chain to pull and unlock the door. So different areas that they can interact with and access a new area. In the area beyond is this burning shrine, which has sort of this flame statue behind it, and it's missing its eyes. Well, earlier in the dungeon, the players can find these eyes, and if they put them back, they're free to take these gemstones that are in this sort of glowing pile of ash. And if the players just decide to try to grab the gemstones without restoring the statue, they risk taking the damage from the flames, which is clued to them by the glowing pile of ash which they're in. So it gives a nice sort of telegraphing of this trap and showing a way that how the players can kind of alleviate it and get the treasure if they want. There are prisoners in the Barrow, so if your players find them and interact with them, they can free these merchants and get them out of the Barrow. And doing so, the merchants will pay the party a large sum of gold. Later in the dungeon, the players can find the tree cave with the undead treant, who the players have to sort of convince that they aren't undead themselves. And if they do so, he might be able to give them more information about the dungeon and possibly aid them in that regard. Different elements with creatures that might be too powerful for the players to fight, but are sort of an obstacle in their own right, even for low-level players, and sort of using them in different ways rather than just purely combat. So it's a really great job that Chance is doing and sort of adding these different elements into the Barrow. When your players get deep enough, they will find the central crypt where most of the skeletons and zombies are hanging out. They're drinking and laughing and singing and just generally carousing. There's sort of a fun depiction of them drinking the wine, and it's just sort of sloughing through their bones because they obviously have no stomachs, and they have sort of this amassed hoard in their central crypt that they've, stolen from the merchants and the caravans. So if the players really want to get that money, they're going to have to confront these undead in this room. And of course, the players can find the wizard's chamber deep in the dungeon. This is Quintus, who realizes that he's in over his head, and the players can decide to help him out, get him out of there, or they can kill him. And it's sort of up to them. So a lot of sort of interesting choices and options that the players have with this module. I think it's really great. Looks like a lot of fun. I would definitely recommend checking out the Barrow of the Bone Blaggards. Next up, we have the Shrine of the Ooze Serpent, a level 1 through 3 dungeon adventure by Nate Treem. And what we have going on here is, once again, a group of monsters are waylaying a nearby road, and the local duke would like it investigated. What's actually happening is a tribe of gloops, which are kind of like bullywugs in sort of a non-trademark way, have found this old gnomish shrine, and inside it is this grease dragon known as Sootmurk, and they've sort of awakened her and are starting to worship her. They're taking travelers from the road to feed to her, along with taking their treasure to supplement her hoard. So on the right-hand side, we have the map, and once again, we have a nice map here, a little bit smaller than the Barrow of the Bone Blaggards, only 12 rooms, but again, there's multiple egresses into the dungeon, so that's great. Some different looping paths that the players can explore, some different secret rooms or secret passageways. So a lot of sort of fun there, where if the players find these different secrets, that can make them feel smart and clever. And there's a lot of cool different toys that they can interact within this smaller dungeon, but still a fun adventure that the players can check out. The main factions in the dungeon are the Gloops, which are these bullywug-like humanoids, and they're led by Captain Gullion, who is a gloop that is sort of in charge of taking care and appeasing Sootmurk. He charges her subjects for access to see her, so it's kind of this flavorful, jealous type situation where he's protecting her but extracting money from the players or the gloops in order to see Sootmurk. Sootmurk herself is a 12-legged wingless dragon and has sort of this pitch black skin, and it kind of oozes sort of this grease that she secretes and kind of smears across the different areas that she. And then you have Gorf Thistle, who is a gnome treasure hunter who's gone to the tomb to find these magical treasures. There's a sword and a crown that he's looking for inside, and of course he might be willing to party with adventurers in order to defeat Sootmurk. One of the first rooms the players can find is the chapel, which has this 12-foot high statue of Mulvis, which is a demon. It's actually the cover art of Anthology 2, and it's holding these 3 brass lightning bolts in its hand. The lightning bolts can be removed and used by the players, so they can either use them as a damaging attack, throwing the bolts at opponents, which could be useful against Sootmurk if they choose to fight her, or they can be used as batteries to power things that are found throughout the dungeon. So a couple of different choices and options there that the players can decide to use, and it's really flavorful. In the room, there's some murals that kind of depict the gnomes and their dealings with this demon that they seem to sort of worship, but also binding to keep in the area. And in one of them there's a picture of the king sort of pulling on a spine. And if the players do that to the statue, they will reveal a secret passageway that gives them access to another part of the dungeon. And if they do that, they can find an automaton closet that has a built automaton inside of it. If they're clever enough, they can figure out that those lightning bolts can power it, and doing so turns it on, and it becomes sort of these whirling blades of death. And if they're able to point that at their enemies, they might be able to use that to clear the way or fight Sootmurk if they're smart enough. They need some different tools to move it, or a lot of people, because it's quite heavy, but they are available throughout the dungeon. Again, if your players think through and are clever enough to realize how they could get that into action. We have Gorf Thistle's hideout. So here we have some great artwork of Gorf Thistle and his clockwork dog Butch that might be in the hideout, or he might be roaming around the dungeon if the players find him in a random encounter. And he has some own goals and ambitions within the dungeon, wants to find that treasure, but could be willing to work with the party because he also wants to defeat Sootmurk. One really fun thing that he has is this scroll of necromancy, spelled with the GN like the gnome, that allows the user to cast it and turn all dead gnomes within an area into zombies that can be controlled by that spellcaster and used in combat. Of course, there is a crypt later on in the dungeon with a bunch of gnomes in it that the players, they could use the scroll to raise the gnomes and fight against the gloops or Sootmurk if they choose so. The Foundry is home to the magic sword that Gorfthistle is looking for, and to free it, the players need to sort of strike this vat of solidified iron with one of the lightning bolts, which liquefies the iron and frees the sword. So they can choose to either keep the sword for themselves or give it to Gorfthistle if they would like his assistance. Deeper on, you will find the catacombs where the different gnomes are entombed in their different alcoves. Some of them have gas traps that can paralyze the players for a while, but they have different treasures and items listed out in them in this sort of sidebar over here. One of them does have the crown that Gorfthistle is looking for. But yeah, lots of different treasures and items that the players can interact with. And this is where you can find that sort of supply of gnomes if you wish to use the scroll of necromancy on. Within the King's Coffer, there is a hidden passageway that allows the players to bypass the checkpoints of the gloops and go straight to Sootmurk if they are smart enough to find it. Eventually, the players will make their way into Sootmurk's chamber. Here we have a great artwork by Jacob Fleming of Sootmurk with her 12 legs and flame breath burning a poor victim. But essentially, the players can interact with her. She has built quite a treasure hoard as a dragon, so your players will be tempted to try to get her treasure hoard from her, and how they choose to do that is, their own choice. They could use the automaton or the lightning bolts, or work with Gorfthistle or raise the gnomes. So a lot of different options on how they could choose to fight Sootmurk, who is a pretty strong opponent with 6 hit die, especially for level 1 through 3 characters. So that is the Shrine of the Oozing Serpent, a fun little dungeon, lots of little interactive elements, some great looping paths, definitely worth checking out. Looks like a really interesting dungeon to throw against your players. Next up, we have the Cathedral of the Crimson Death, a 4 to 6 level dungeon adventure by Diego Nogueira. This is a little bit higher level adventure, so it's nice to see those thrown in the anthology as well. And what we have going on here is sort of, there's this deathless plague that has been ravaging the land, making people sick, and when they die, they sort of become these undead thralls rising up. And there is this Church of the Crimson Flame that was sort of seen as a beacon of hope in the area. They would try to heal people and fight against the undead. But what actually ends up happening to them is the demon that set off the deathless plague in the first place infiltrates their ranks, kills the Crimson Bishop and assumes his form, and slowly begins to corrupt the church. And they go from sort of being healers and helpers to turning to imprisonment and torture and burning people to sort of deal with the plague, which they're not really dealing with at all. So kind of turning it into this own dark landscape. And the players can go and investigate and see what's happening with this bishop who used to be a character of hope and light and now sort of turns to these darker purposes. On the right, we have the map, which has the different keys there. Again, not a huge area, I think 14 rooms in total. There's one main entrance into the cathedral itself. It looks like there's maybe different windows, so it's up to you to rule on if the players can access through those windows, or if they do, breaking glass, things like that. And I believe maybe they can also access sort of through area 13 to this kind of, through this sort of pit of death, I believe it is. So taking a look at the factions in the cathedral, we first have the Crimson Bishop, who is the demon who's assumed the place of the bishop, and he is sort of controlling the area through his means of sorcery. you have the Crimson Knights, who are still human, but they've become corrupted by the demonic influence of the bishop, and they can't perceive the undead around them at all. They view them as human. You do have Captain Fardir, however, who is the captain, once the captain of the Crimson Knights, but his mind has kind of been shattered by the atrocities that he's seen around him, and he is able to perceive the Sons of Bahal as undead, but he is a character that would be one that the players can interact with, but is going to be hard to get to leave his room or be sort of a useful ally beyond one that might be able to share some information with them. The Sons of Bahal are Crimson Knights that have become infected by the plague or transformed in sort of these rotting undead monstrosities. They are kind of the bishop's main henchmen that do sort of his dirty work. And you have the priests who were faithful to Bahal and have either been killed or imprisoned by the bishop. They are able to see the Sons of Bahal in their true form, but they are captured. The players might be able to interact with them if they can find them, but they're few and far between left. And then lastly, you have some prisoners that have been taken that are set to be tortured or killed by the Crimson Knights. If you're familiar with Diego Nogueira, he has also done another old school Essentials adventure, The Halls of the Blood King, and his artwork, I think in that one, is done by the same artist here. It has sort of this very distinct style, very cool, kind of gothic, dark, and a little bit like ornate over the top in terms of like the armor decoration and all that. Very distinctive, very cool. Diego seems to really have that sort of gothic vibe nailed down in these different adventures that he's done for Necrotic Gnome. Looking at the area descriptions, we get a sense of the outer grounds of the cathedral first, so the outer wall and the gates and the grounds around it. There's lots of different sort of patrols going on, so the players will need to figure out how they want to deal with the Crimson Knights in terms of either fighting them or sneaking by them or what have you to access and infiltrate the actual cathedral itself. One thing I noticed in the cathedral grounds is there's reference to a secret door to Area 7, but when I look on the map, I don't see that keyed on the map itself. I'm not exactly sure where that would be. I suppose it's up to the game master to decide where they would like to put that, but I think that's possibly a mistake that they missed out on keying that on the map. This adventure really focuses a lot more on interaction with the different denizens in the dungeon, and less so on sort of structural tricks. There are some, there's different secret areas and keys to unlock doors and things like that, but it's often a person that holds the key. So unless the players are willing to pick the lock or are successfully able to pick the lock, they'll have to interact with different characters, either fight them or convince them to hand over the key to access some of these different locked areas. So it's really much more character focus than the two previous adventures in the anthology. One area that is fun is sort of the Crimson Nave. So entering the actual larger part of the cathedral, there are these giant statues that you can sort of turn their swords downward, and that will cause the large altar in Area 9 to slowly slide forward and reveal stones to Area 14, where the players will likely encounter the demonic bishop. One character that the players can interact with is Captain Fardir, who will likely be in his quarters. As I said, his mind was kind of shattered by the atrocities that the Crimson Knights started to commit. And he will sort of give a clue to the players. He kind of raves about the abomination and the betrayer, and he'll gesture to the bishop's chambers, sort of giving these clues that something might not be right with the bishop. Another clue that the players can find is in the mess kitchen, sort of talking to the cook, who will give the players sort of this nasty gristle stew, and he'll talk about how it became the bishop's favorite meal 2 years ago, when he had been a strict vegetarian before then. So again, kind of hinting at these clues of something might be wrong with the bishop. If the players are able to access the bishop's chambers, they can find some more clues about what might be going on. Specifically, the true bishop's diary, which talks about sensing a demonic presence and talking about how they're going to confront it. And that's the last entry in the diary, which was 2 years ago, around the same time that the cook mentioned the diet change of the bishop. A couple different clues that are going on there that can help inform the players about what might be happening in the cathedral. Eventually, the players can find the deathless abode, the place where the demon is likely to be confronted, and they will have to decide on what they want to do with them. The bishop will try to convert them and transform them into sons of Baal by sort of congratulating them on being successful in making it that far. But if the players are set on fighting him, he is quite nasty. He's a 8-hit die monster that has a lot of spells and different abilities that can cause a really bad time for the players. But should the players beat him, they are able to lift the deathless plague from the land and sort of return the area to a more natural state, along with recovering a lot of treasure, which is, something that the players really like. One other fun thing that they include is beyond Area 14, there is sort of this gateway to the abyss. It's sort of left up to the game master on this pit that spirals down deeper below. Is it sort of another dungeon that the players can continue to explore, or is it a gateway to the abyss or the hells, things like that the players can decide to explore if they wish. And again, that's up to the GM to decide what is down there for them to find. One thing that I will note about 14 and 15, again, I don't see them on the map whatsoever. I know they're located below the cathedral, but there's no sort of mini map showing anything like what Area 14 or 15 should look like. So I don't know if that's just left to the game master to decide what that looks like. There is some description, but there's no keyed map for it, which is a little bit of a disappointment. I would have liked to have seen that included as well. Next, we have the Ravener's Ghat, a level 6 to 8 dungeon adventure written by Brian Yaksha. And what we have going on here is a temple to the monsoon god, which was led by a learned Rakshasa. And what happened is eventually the Rakshasa were demonized and reduced to man-eaters, and the Ravener also sort of fell into this cruelty and sort of began to keep sort of this everlasting monsoon rains brought down on this temple. And as a result, the divine were displeased with him, and he was ultimately sort of betrayed by his own servants, and they imprisoned him here in the Ghat. And then they put a magical veil over the temple so he could, no one could perceive the temple and possibly free him from his prison where he'd been imprisoned in the waters in this temple in Area 20 here on the map. Very interesting kind of story going on there. And then the veil, of course, starts to decay and become, visible to the world around it, which draws in treasure hunters and draws in sort of these lesser Rakshasa, which are sort of drawn to the Ravener's presence and seek to free him and let him kind of rule the area once more. So on the right, we have the map here, one of two maps. We'll see the second one in a moment. It's sort of a compact temple here, but we do have some nice looping. There's different areas that the players can travel. They can actually choose to arrive from Area 1 or Area 13. They're kind of coming down different mountain paths. There's a bridge, and they can kind of cross. Going into the waters aren't very well advised because both the Rakshasa is in there and some sort of enlightened crocodiles that we'll see in a moment. Here we have kind of a more of an isometric view of the map, so it really gives a bit more sense of what's going on. And I think it's a nice addition. It kind of shows you the different things that are happening. And as I mentioned, the Ravener is bringing down rains constantly, so any of the outdoor areas are affected by this perpetual rain. So something that you can have kind of play in, whether it's slippery or maybe missile weapons are harder to shoot in the rain, different things like that. So we have different denizens in the Ravener's Ghat. First, we have the Ravener, the Rakshasa Lord that's been imprisoned. He's in the lower well in Area 20. There are these things known as falsehoods. So there's different like pictures or motives or mosaics. These shadows will come out of and attack anyone that touches them or tries to pry jewels and gems for them. There are other treasure hunters in the area that have been sort of starting to scour the temple. As I mentioned, there's elevated wildlife, so some wildlife has moved into the area and has been sort of drinking from these blessed waters, and as a result, they've sort of gained sentience. So we have two groups, kind of these elevated baboons and elevated crocodiles that sort of the players can talk to and interact with. The mummified Pujari are the servants of the Ravener who betrayed him and now kind of watch over his imprisoned tomb. Pretty nasty mummies to fight if the players wish to fight them. However, they could decide to work with the party in hopes to destroy the Ravener for good. And then lastly, you have the Rakshasa warriors that are trying to free the Ravener. So if it isn't obvious by now, the Ravener's Ghat is a more Indian-inspired adventure. I think that's great. It adds a little bit more diversity, kind of gives you a bit more of a different theme rather than just sort of standard vanilla medieval Europe fantasy. So really cool in that regards. Some of the words and terms that they use are from Hindi. So there's a glossary there giving you some context for what they are throughout the keyed locations or different characters. So a nice little addition there to add that glossary. So looking at the keyed areas here, we have a bunch of fun different interactive elements within the Ghat. First, we have sort of the ritual hallway. There's a bunch of different carvings that have tons of gems built into them, right? Framed with hundreds of jade, jet, and amethyst gems. And the players can extract them, but to do so, they have to touch the carvings. That awakens the falsehoods that these shadowy figures that emerge and try to attack and kill the player. In the shrine, the players are likely to first find the Pujari, and these are the mummies, so they can either choose to attack them or they can respectfully communicate them, and from there they'll learn the story of this location in the first place. So they'll learn about the Ravener and him being imprisoned. But if they try to desecrate or disrespect the area, they'll have to fight these mummies, which are quite nasty because if they try to defeat the Punjari, they will learn that will quickly return from death as because they are bound to this area to prevent the Ravener from rising to power ever again. The only way they can truly be killed is to take the hand of the Ravener and either destroy it or remove it from the temple or kill the Ravener outright. And then their sort of purpose has been fulfilled and they can finally find eternal rest. The players can interact with the baboons who are elevated. They will largely ignore the players unless they're treated with courtly etiquette. And then they will tell them some information about the area. Working their way through the dungeon, the players can eventually come to the sacred chamber where there is a whole group of these Pujari who are watching over a secret passageway which holds this sort of evil artifact, which is the hand of the Ravener. So his left hand was severed and they've sort of kept it away from him because if he gets a hold of it, it will return him to his full power. And if the players speak and interact with the Pujari, they can agree to take a quest per the spell and take up the artifact to destroy it, in which case the Pujari will let them have the hand. The hidden altar is where the hand of the Ravener lies. The hand of the Ravener is quite powerful, as you can see per the sidebar, and it is cursed, so if someone touches it, they will become chaotic and they'll have this sort of desire to return it to the Ravener. So they need to be careful in how they handle it. And it can only be destroyed in sort of the holy flames of the sun god. So they need to take it to a temple of the sun god. If the players make their way to the Hierophant's chambers, they will find sort of the lead Pujari who can share with them information about how to destroy the Ravener. And to do that, they need to drain the two giant wells and go and fight him. And they're willing to share that information if the players agree to destroy him. Eventually, they will find the Ghat mechanism that will allow them to open the floodgates and drain these giant wells. And to do so, they need a large amount of strength and a bless spell. So eventually, if your players drain the wells, they can go to the lower well and deal with the Ravener. And he's a Rakshasa, so quite nasty, has those spell immunities and different spells. He will try to charm the players to get them to turn on his side and help free him. He can use illusions to look like someone more friendly, even though if he's still chained, he will still have those silver chains around him. But he'll do a lot to try to get the party to not fight him. If the players are able to deal with him, they can sort of free the land and end sort of the monsoon rains around. And there is quite a large hoard there for the players to collect. Being a higher level adventure, a lot more treasure in this one. And well, if the Ravener should get a hold of his hand, well, that is quite nasty for the players because he becomes much more powerful and is unable to be killed unless they are able to sever that hand once again and then deal with him all over. So not a good idea to let him get a hold of his hand. If he does, it can be a lot harder on the players. So that is Adventure Anthology number 2 by Necrotic Gnome. Overall, I really like these 4 set of adventures. I think reading both and looking through both of them, I would say if I were to choose Anthology 1 or Anthology 2, I would definitely go with Anthology 2. I think there's just a lot more interesting dungeons, had a little bit more interactivity, a little bit more interesting stuff going on. So if I had to pick one of them, I would take number 2. But I think both are great. You get a set of 4 adventures in each of them. The price point, as I mentioned, is $20 for the print book and $10 for the PDF. So not too bad. Definitely worth checking out. I'll include links to both down below. Thanks for watching the review. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like. Consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this in the future. Thanks for watching, and I will see you aboard the Earthmote again soon.